It was supposed to be a happy return. I had just wrapped up my first year of college, eager to come home and reconnect with my family. The last year had been tough. College life was far different from what I had expected, but it was exciting. I had finally gained some independence and was looking forward to spending the summer with my parents, catching up on everything I had missed. When I pulled up to the house, I didn't think anything was unusual. The front door was closed, just as it had always been. The yard was neatly manicured, and everything looked perfect, except for one thing: the porch. Instead of the warm, welcoming sight of my family waiting for me, there were two large garbage bags sitting by the door. I frowned as I pulled into the driveway, wondering if maybe my parents had been doing some cleaning or yard work. I stepped out of the car, dragging my suitcase behind me, and approached the bags. As I got closer, a cold chill ran down my spine. Those weren't just trash bags. I hesitated, my heart pounding. Something felt terribly wrong. I knelt down and ripped open the first bag. As the plastic tore, I was hit with a wave of confusion and disbelief. My belongings, clothes, books, pictures, even my laptop, were carelessly stuffed inside. I couldn't believe it. What was going on? Why were my things out here, in trash bags? Panic began to set in as I stood up, looking around for some sign of my parents. Had they gone somewhere? Why hadn't they told me? The door to the house was locked. I knocked, feeling the sweat beginning to form on my palms. No answer. I tried calling my mom and dad, but the calls went straight to voicemail. I left frantic messages, telling them I was home, asking them to pick up. Nothing. I felt my stomach twist with anxiety. I couldn't comprehend it. Where were they? Why had they done this? Why was everything I owned left out in the cold? I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the bags, trying to make sense of everything. My mind raced. Had I done something wrong? Had they gotten mad at me for some reason? But nothing came to mind. Sure, I wasn't perfect, but this wasn't normal. No one just kicked their child out like this, right? Was I even wanted here anymore? I sank to the ground, my head spinning. I needed answers. But right now, I needed to understand what had happened. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at my belongings strewn across the porch. My heart was racing, my thoughts clouded with confusion and disbelief. I couldn't understand it. What had happened? Where were my parents? Why was this happening to me? I glanced down at the bags again, my stomach twisting. I picked up a few items: my old sweatshirt, a textbook from a class I barely passed, and a picture frame with a photo of our family taken on one of our summer trips. I hugged the frame to my chest, the weight of it suddenly too heavy to bear. This wasn't just about things being thrown out. This felt like a rejection, a betrayal. I stepped back from the bags and looked up at the house that had always felt like home, the place I'd grown up in, where my memories lived. But now, it seemed distant, foreign, even cold. There was no warmth to greet me here, only the cold, hard reality of the situation. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. I tried calling again, and again. No answer. I turned to walk around the house, hoping to find some clue or sign of what was going on. I checked the back door. Locked. I went to the window near the kitchen, peering through to see if anyone was home. It was dark inside, eerily quiet. Where were they? A sudden thought hit me, and I ran around to the side of the house, to the garage. It was the only other place I hadn't checked. As I approached, I noticed that the door was slightly ajar. I hesitated for a moment, my pulse quickening before pushing it open. Inside, the garage was a mess. Boxes were overturned and tools were scattered across the floor. There was no sign of my parents, no sign that anyone had been here for a while. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the workbench, was an envelope with my name written on it. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was my mother's. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. The letter inside was short, the words jagged, almost as if written in a hurry. "We can't keep doing this. I hope you understand why we had to do this. You need to learn your place, Emily. Maybe this will help you understand how the world really works. We're moving on without you. Don't come back." The words blurred as I read them, my vision swimming with emotion. What was this? My heart thudded in my chest as the letter seemed to burn into my mind. I had always known my parents had high expectations for me. I had always felt like I was in their shadow, always trying to measure up to their standards. But this wasn't just disappointment, it was rejection. I stumbled back, leaning against the workbench as my mind raced. Learn my place? What did that even mean? How had we gone from family dinners, from laughter around the table, to this? What had happened to the parents I had once known? The words in the letter hit harder than I expected, but something else burned even more fiercely, a desire for answers. This wasn't just about being tossed out of the house. This was about the years of my life that had been manipulated, controlled, and now, taken from me without any warning. I couldn't just let this go. I needed to know the truth. I needed to confront them. No matter what it took, I couldn't stay in the garage any longer. The words in the letter burned in my mind, and I could feel the walls closing in on me. I needed answers, and I needed them now. The anger inside me had grown from a small ember to a raging fire. I had been abandoned, discarded, and now I was going to find out why. I took a deep breath, wiped my eyes, and stepped back out into the yard. I didn't even care if my belongings were still sitting on the porch. It didn't matter anymore. I needed to confront them. I needed to know what had gone so terribly wrong. I grabbed my phone and dialed my father's number once again. The ringing felt louder than ever, echoing in my ears. Why wasn't he answering? After a few seconds, the voicemail kicked in again. I couldn't leave another message. Not this time. This time I needed answers face to face. Without thinking, I jumped into my car, slammed the door shut, and drove straight to my parents' office. I didn't even know what I was going to say when I got there. I just knew that I couldn't sit around waiting for them to return my calls or hoping they'd show up at the house. I had to take control. The drive felt like it took an eternity. The streets blurred as my mind raced. What was I going to say? Would they even be there? What could I possibly say to make them understand the depth of the hurt they had caused me? As I pulled up to their office building, I felt a strange mix of dread and determination. The office was dark, and the lights inside looked dim. I parked and walked up to the front door, my heart beating faster with every step. I knew this was it. This was the moment where everything would either unravel or make sense. I pushed open the door. The familiar office smells of coffee and paper surrounding me. I saw no sign of my parents at first, but I could hear voices from the back of the office. I walked quietly toward the sounds, and as I rounded the corner, I froze. There, sitting at the table in their office, were my parents. But they weren't alone. There were two people I didn't recognize. A man and a woman, both sitting with my parents, all of them deep in conversation. They were laughing, talking about business deals and projects, but as I walked into the room, everything stopped. My mother looked up first, her face unreadable. My father's eyes widened, but he didn't say anything at first. The strangers at the table exchanged awkward glances, but they stayed silent too. I stood there for a moment, taking in the scene. What was going on? Why were they here? And more importantly, why had they been so cold with me? The silence grew thick, suffocating, until finally, my mother spoke. "Emily," she began, her voice colder than I had ever heard it. "What are you doing here?" I felt the heat of anger rise in my chest, but I took a deep breath to steady myself. I wasn't going to let her control this moment. "I came for answers," I said firmly, my voice unwavering. "Why? Why did you do this to me? Why did you throw me out like that without warning? I deserve to know the truth." My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but it was my mother who responded. "You don't understand, Emily," she said, her voice laced with frustration. "We did what we had to do." "Had to do?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What do you mean by that? What could possibly justify leaving me on the porch with my life packed up like garbage? I'm your daughter. I deserve respect." The strangers exchanged another glance, and the woman, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. "I'm sorry, Emily," she said, her tone apologetic but distant. "But your parents are right. It was for the best." I turned to her, confused. "For the best? What do you mean? Who are you?" "I'm Rebecca," she said softly. "I work with your parents on the company's financial planning. We've been advising them on some difficult decisions, and this was one of them." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "So this was all about money?" I asked, my voice shaking. "This wasn't about me. This was about their business." My mother didn't look guilty. She looked detached. "You don't understand. It's not personal, Emily. It was just a business decision. Your presence was starting to hinder our image. We needed to cut ties with the distractions, and you were one of them." My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, everything went silent. I wasn't just rejected as their daughter. I had been treated as an obstacle to their success. I felt a cold wave of disbelief wash over me, but before I could respond, my father spoke up. "Emily, we didn't want to hurt you, but this is what had to happen for the good of the company. We've made the hard decisions. You've had to grow up, and we've had to make sacrifices." I shook my head, unable to find words. I had always believed in them, but now, standing here, I felt like I was speaking to strangers. The room seemed to close in on me as my mother's words echoed in my ears. "For the good of the company." It felt like a betrayal, one so deep that it made my heart ache with confusion and disbelief. How could they do this to me? How could they prioritize business over family, over their own flesh and blood? I stood there, frozen, staring at my parents. I didn't know what to say, what to do. I had always been taught to respect my elders, to honor family above all else, but now I was faced with the reality that they didn't care about me. To them, I was nothing more than an inconvenience. Rebecca, the woman I still didn't fully understand, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Emily, I know this is hard, but you have to see it from their perspective. They've worked so hard to build this company, and they can't let anything, even family, get in the way of that." I couldn't even look at her. Her words felt like salt in an open wound. They didn't just want to push me aside, they wanted me to accept it without question. They wanted me to forgive them for casting me aside like I didn't matter. "No," I said quietly, my voice trembling with emotion. "You don't get to say that. You don't get to tell me how to feel about this. I'm not some business transaction. I'm your daughter." My father let out a frustrated sigh. "Emily, this is for your own good. We've been doing this for years, trying to balance the business and our family. But the truth is, the business has been taking too much of our time. We've had to make some tough calls." I laughed bitterly, the sound foreign to my own ears. "Tough calls? You're talking about abandoning your own daughter. You're talking about throwing me away like some kind of inconvenience. That's not a tough call. That's a choice you made, a choice to put your business before me, before family." My heart felt like it was being ripped out of my chest. The realization was harsh. They didn't love me the way I had always thought. I had spent my entire life trying to live up to their expectations, trying to prove I was worthy of their affection and approval. But now, standing here, it was clear to me that no matter how hard I tried, it was never going to be enough. "Emily, please, we never meant for this to happen," my mother said, her voice softer now, but it was too late. The damage was done. The truth had been laid bare. I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. "You never meant for this? Maybe not, but you still did it. And now, I don't know who you are anymore. I don't know who I am in this family. I've been living in a lie for so long." There was silence in the room, the weight of my words sinking in. I could feel my anger slowly transforming into a deep sadness. I wasn't just angry at them. I was angry at myself for believing that things could be different, for thinking that, somehow, they would love me the way I needed them to. I had let myself be manipulated for too long. "Fine," I said, my voice low but firm. If this is how you see me, then maybe it's time I stop seeing you the same way. I don't need to be a part of a family that would throw me away like this. I'm done trying to prove myself." I turned to leave, but before I walked out of the room, I stopped at the door and looked back at my parents one last time. "I hope one day you understand what you've lost, because I'm not coming back." With that, I walked out, leaving behind the family that had once meant everything to me. But now, I realized, it was time to find my own path. I walked out of the office and into the cold night air, the sound of the door clicking shut behind me almost deafening. The weight of the conversation lingered in the back of my mind like a suffocating cloud. Every word they'd said echoed in my head, but more than anything, it was the feeling of being discarded that haunted me the most. I sat in my car for a few minutes, staring out at the dark streets. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, still trying to process everything that had just happened. How could they do this? How could my own parents treat me like I was disposable, like I didn't matter? But as the initial shock began to wear off, something else started to grow inside me. A sense of clarity. For the first time in my life, I realized that I didn't need their approval. I didn't need them to validate me or tell me I was worth something. I had value without them. I wiped the tears from my eyes, my face feeling cold as the wind blew through the cracked window. I started the car, pulling away from the office, driving aimlessly through the streets. But for the first time in a long while, I wasn't running from something. I was running toward something, a future I had control over, a future that didn't revolve around the family that had just discarded me. As I drove, I made a promise to myself. I would build my own life. I wouldn't let their rejection define me. I wouldn't let their success and their image get in the way of what I knew I was capable of. I was going to prove to myself that I could succeed, that I could be happy, and that I didn't need anyone's permission to thrive. The next morning, I woke up with a newfound sense of purpose. I didn't have a home to return to anymore, and I didn't have the comfort of my family's approval. But I had something far more valuable: freedom. I reached out to a few old friends and got a place of my own. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The apartment was small, and the walls were bare, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. I could breathe. I could make my own decisions. I didn't have to answer to anyone, and that felt like the beginning of something new. Days turned into weeks, and I focused on rebuilding my life. I started picking up the pieces of my career, networking, applying for jobs, and slowly but surely, I found my footing. The hurt from my family's rejection didn't go away overnight, but with each day, I felt a little stronger. I realized that being alone didn't mean I was abandoned. It meant I was free. It wasn't easy. There were days when I thought about reaching out to my parents, asking for answers or seeking their forgiveness. But then I remembered the way they had made me feel. I remembered the coldness, the disinterest, and the rejection. I wasn't going to beg for their love. I had to love myself first. And so I moved forward. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild myself from the inside out. And along the way, I found people who appreciated me, not for what I could do for them, but for who I was. I learned that sometimes, the hardest thing you'll ever do is let go of the people who are supposed to love you the most. But in letting go, you make room for the people who will truly support you and help you grow into the person you were always meant to be. As the months passed, I slowly began to realize that rejection wasn't the end of the road. It was the beginning of something new. It felt like I was shedding the old skin of who I thought I had to be, and stepping into a new version of myself, one that was stronger, more independent, and more self-aware. I didn't need my parents' approval anymore. I didn't need to constantly prove myself to anyone. For the first time in my life, I felt completely in control of my own destiny. Sure, it had come at a great cost, but what I had gained was far more valuable than any approval or family inheritance I had once longed for. I was free to make my own choices, to carve my own path, and to surround myself with people who truly cared for me. The more I focused on myself and my career, the more I realized that I was building something stronger than the family dynamic I had always wanted. I was building a community of like-minded individuals, friends, mentors, and colleagues who lifted me up, supported me, and valued me for who I was. I didn't need to impress anyone anymore. I just needed to be myself. One day, I got an email from a job I had applied to months earlier. They wanted to offer me a position, not just any position, but the role that I had dreamed of for years. It felt like the culmination of everything I had worked for. It felt like a sign that I was on the right path, even if it meant going through the hardest year of my life. As I sat at my desk, staring at the email, I realized something profound. The life I had fought so hard to build was finally taking shape. This wasn't just about the job. This was about the freedom I had found, the resilience I had built, and the self-worth I had finally embraced. In that moment, I allowed myself to feel proud. Proud of how far I had come. Proud of the battles I had fought, not just against my family, but against the doubts and fears that had held me back for so long. I wasn't the person I had been when I left for college. I wasn't the same person who had been rejected and left in a pile of garbage bags. I was stronger, and more importantly, I was free. That evening, I went out to celebrate, not just the job offer, but everything, the growth, the independence, the journey. I knew there would be more challenges ahead, more hurdles to cross, but I was ready for them. I wasn't afraid of rejection anymore. I wasn't afraid of being alone. The next day, I called my parents. This time, it was different. It wasn't out of need or desperation. It wasn't to beg for their approval or to ask for forgiveness. It was simply to speak the truth. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "I'm doing well. I've moved on, and I'm building the life I want. I'm not asking for your approval anymore, but I want you to know that I've learned to stand on my own, and I'm proud of who I've become." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the hesitation in their voices as they processed my words, but I didn't let it faze me. This was my truth, and I was finally living it. I ended the call, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The chapter of waiting for validation from my parents had closed. The door to their rejection had been shut, and I was ready for whatever came next. It had been months since that night. The letter, the bags, the betrayal, all of it had faded into the past. I had rebuilt my life, not just on my own, but with a strength and determination that surprised even me. I had fought through the darkness, stood tall despite the rejection, and I had come out the other side stronger than ever. The job I had always dreamed of was mine. My career was taking off, and more importantly, I was at peace with who I had become. The wounds from my family's abandonment were healing, not because they had apologized or recognized their mistakes, but because I had learned to forgive them. And more importantly, I had forgiven myself. There were still moments, of course, when I thought about the way things could have been, the perfect family, the support, the love. But those thoughts no longer held the power they once did. I had realized something incredibly valuable. I didn't need their love to validate me. I was enough just as I was. I still didn't know where my parents were. They hadn't reached out, and I hadn't made any attempts to contact them either. In a way, I had come to terms with the fact that some relationships simply couldn't be mended. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. But that didn't mean I was doomed to live my life in their shadow. I was free. One evening, after a long day of work, I took a walk in the park. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything. As I walked along the path, I couldn't help but smile. The past few years had been difficult, but they had been necessary. They had shaped me into the person I had always needed to become, independent, strong, and unapologetically myself. I thought about the future, about the life I wanted to create. I no longer worried about proving anything to anyone. I was building my own legacy now, and it was no longer dependent on my family's approval or success. It was mine, and that was all that mattered. The past was behind me, and I was no longer carrying the weight of rejection. I had turned the page, and as I looked up at the stars, I realized that this was just the beginning. My journey was only starting, and I was ready for whatever came next.